He thought I had on lipstick, and I'd say, "No, Daddy, it's my natural color." And he'd try to rub it off. It wouldn't come off, of course. But we used to paint.
Dolly Parton's final health struggles have left fans looking back at the last chapter of a life that seemed almost impossible to slow down.
But you got to have a canvas, I guess, to paint on. I'm not a striking beauty, and I know that. I guess that's always one of the reasons.
Especially because the country music icon spent so much of her career presenting strength, humor, warmth, and determination even when
I always liked to wear too much makeup. I always wanted to be prettier. I always wanted to be more. But I was not born like some.
when life became difficult. For decades, Dolly Parton had been one of the most recognizable figures in entertainment, a woman whose
Surgery till I was 40 years old. Well, I did have my boobs expanded a little, but I had nice boobs.
voice, songwriting, personality, and unmistakable presence turned her into far more than a country music star. But as the final period of her life unfolded, attention began shifting away from the stage and toward the personal challenges surrounding her health, raising an emotional question that many fans may now find themselves asking. What was Dolly experiencing when the public was still seeing the same familiar smile? Dolly had built a career on making people feel hopeful. Her songs often carried stories about hardship, love, family, ambition, disappointment, and resilience, but somehow she always found a way to turn difficult moments into something that could connect with another person. That strength became part of her identity, and perhaps that is why any discussion of her final health struggles feels so different. Fans were accustomed to seeing Dolly keep moving, keep creating, keep performing, and keep finding new ways to reach people. The idea that her health could eventually become something she could not simply push through is difficult to reconcile with the image she had created over so many decades. Yet even legendary figures have moments when the demands of life become more personal and more difficult to hide. What makes the final chapter especially emotional is that Dolly's relationship with her audience had always been unusually intimate. She did not simply perform songs for strangers. She told stories, shared pieces of herself, joked about aging, spoke openly about life, and repeatedly reminded people that behind the glamorous image was a real woman who had experienced her own struggles. That honesty made her connection with fans stronger, but it also meant that when questions surrounding her health began to attract attention, people naturally wanted to understand what was happening. The most important thing to remember is that not every detail surrounding a public figure's health becomes public, and there is a difference between what is confirmed and what fans may speculate about. Dolly had always been entitled to privacy, especially when dealing with personal challenges, and that makes the known moments even more significant. Instead of focusing on rumors or creating details that were never confirmed, the real story is about the contrast between Dolly's enormous public strength and the vulnerability that can come with facing serious health difficulties. That contrast is what makes this final chapter so heartbreaking. Dolly Parton had spent much of her life convincing people that almost any obstacle could be met with courage, laughter, faith, hard work, and a song. But health struggles do not always follow the rules of determination. There are moments when even the strongest person has to slow down, reassess what matters, and accept that the body has limits. For someone who had spent a lifetime moving at an extraordinary pace, that change could not have been easy. Dolly was never simply an entertainer who waited for opportunities to arrive. She built opportunities herself. From her early years in Tennessee to becoming an international superstar, she repeatedly transformed setbacks into motivation. She became a songwriter whose work was recorded by other major artists, a performer whose voice became instantly recognizable, and a businesswoman and philanthropist whose influence extended far beyond music. Her career was defined by motion. There was always another song, another performance, another project, another idea, another reason to keep going. That relentless energy made her final health struggles feel even more unexpected to the people who had followed her for years. When fans see someone who has seemed almost unstoppable suddenly face circumstances that require more rest, more caution, or more personal attention, it can change the way they look back at everything that came before. Suddenly, the performances seem more precious. The interviews feel more meaningful. The jokes about life and aging sound different. And the songs that once seemed like simple entertainment can begin to feel like pieces of a much larger story. Dolly's music had always contained an emotional understanding of life's temporary nature, even when the songs were filled with humor or optimism. She understood that people experience loss, uncertainty, disappointment, and change, and she had a rare ability to make those emotions feel understandable rather than overwhelming. That is one reason her audience became so deeply attached to her. They did not see perfection, they saw resilience. They saw someone who had faced obstacles and continued forward. So when health became part of Dolly's own story, it created a powerful emotional contradiction. The woman who had spent decades encouraging others was suddenly facing challenges that no amount of fame could completely remove. And that is where the mystery surrounding her final period becomes so compelling. How much did she share? What did she keep private? How much did fans understand at the time, and how much only became emotionally significant when they look back? Those questions are natural, but they should not become excuses to invent answers. The most respectful way to understand Dolly's final health struggles is to separate what was publicly acknowledged from everything that remains personal. Her fans may want every detail, but sometimes the most important truth is simply that someone who gave so much of herself to the public still deserved moments that belonged only to her. That privacy does not make her story less powerful. In some ways, it makes it more human. Dolly had spent decades under enormous public attention, yet she remained remarkably skilled at controlling what she shared and how she presented herself. She could make millions laugh with a single sentence, turn an ordinary story into a memorable moment, and walk into a room with the confidence of someone who understood exactly who she was. But confidence does not mean a person never struggles. It means they continue to find their way through those struggles. That distinction is important when looking back at the final chapter of Dolly's life. Her health challenges should not erase the decades of strength that came before them, nor should they reduce her legacy to a final period of difficulty. Dolly Parton's story was always much larger than one chapter. Still, that final chapter matters because it reminds fans that behind the legend was a human being, someone who could become tired, someone who could have difficult days, someone who could worry about what came next, someone who could need support, and perhaps most importantly, someone who did not have to be invincible to be extraordinary. Dolly's greatest strength was never the idea that nothing could hurt her. It was her ability to keep finding meaning in life despite the challenges that came her way. That is why her final health struggles can be viewed not simply as a sad part of her story, but as another reminder of the humanity behind the icon. Fans often place celebrities on a different level because their achievements seem larger than ordinary life. Dolly's career certainly was, but her health struggles brought the story back to something everyone can understand. No matter how successful someone becomes, there are circumstances that remind them of the importance of family, friendship, rest, reflection, and time. For Dolly, those realities existed alongside the enormous legacy she had already created. She had spent years giving audiences songs that became part of their personal histories. Couples remembered her music from important moments. Families passed her songs from one generation to the next. Fans who had discovered her decades ago continued listening long after they first heard her voice. That kind of legacy does not disappear when a person's circumstances change. It becomes even more meaningful. And as fans now reflect on Dolly's final health struggles, many may find themselves returning to the same question. Was she aware of just how much she meant to people? The answer may never be fully measurable, because no number of messages, awards, tributes, or records can truly quantify a relationship between an artist and an audience. But Dolly spent enough of her life surrounded by people who loved her work to understand that her music had reached places she could never physically visit. Her songs traveled into homes, hospitals, weddings, family gatherings, lonely nights, celebrations, and moments when people needed comfort. That is an extraordinary thing to leave behind. It also explains why conversations about her health can become so emotional. Fans are not simply concerned about the condition of a famous person. They are thinking about someone whose voice may have accompanied them through major moments of their own lives. When that person faces serious challenges, it can feel strangely personal. Yet perhaps the most fitting way to remember Dolly is not through fear but through gratitude. Gratitude for the years she gave. Gratitude for the songs. Gratitude for the laughter. Gratitude for the courage she displayed throughout her life. And gratitude for every moment when Dolly managed to make people feel that their own struggles were survivable. Her final health struggles may have shown a more vulnerable side of her, but vulnerability does not diminish a legacy like hers. If anything, it makes the story more complete. The woman who encouraged millions was also a person who had to face her own uncertainties. The superstar who seemed larger than life still had limits. The performer who could light up a stage still had moments when the stage had to wait. And the songwriter who spent a lifetime putting other people's emotions into words ultimately left behind a story that continues to make people reflect on their own lives. That may be one of the most important lessons hidden inside this difficult chapter. Dolly Parton never needed to be untouched by hardship to become an inspiration. She became an inspiration because she understood hardship and continued creating anyway. Her journey from a small-town childhood to global fame was filled with moments when the easy path would have been to stop, but she kept moving. Her health struggles represented another kind of challenge, one that fame, wealth, and success could not simply solve. Yet they do not define the whole person. They are one part of a much larger story, and that larger story is filled with music, generosity, determination, laughter, and an extraordinary ability to connect with people. As fans look back at Dolly's final years, perhaps the saddest realization is not simply that she faced health difficulties. It is that the public often sees only fragments of what someone is going through. A smile can hide exhaustion. A joke can exist alongside worry. A public appearance can tell only part of the story. That is why compassion matters when discussing the final health struggles of someone who lived so much of her life in the public eye. Dolly gave the world an enormous amount of herself, but she was never obligated to reveal every private battle. The moments she chose to share are enough to remind us that she was human, and the moments she kept private deserve respect. Her story should therefore not end with questions about what she could no longer do. It should end with recognition of everything she had already accomplished. Dolly Parton changed country music, influenced generations of artists, created songs that became cultural landmarks, and built a legacy that extended into business, philanthropy, entertainment, and beyond. She proved that authenticity could become a strength, that kindness could coexist with ambition, and that a person could remain deeply connected to their roots while becoming an international figure. Her health struggles were a difficult part of the final chapter, but they cannot overshadow the decades that came before them. And perhaps that is the message fans need most as they process this emotional loss. Dolly Parton was never just the woman on the stage. She was the voice behind memories, the songwriter behind stories, and the person whose personality made millions feel as though they knew her. When people remember her, they will remember much more than her final difficult moments. They will remember the songs that made them cry, the songs that made them smile, the performances that made them proud, and the words that gave them hope when they needed it. They will remember the unmistakable laugh, the unmistakable voice, and the unmistakable Dolly Parton spirit. And while her final health struggles may have revealed a side of her life that was more vulnerable than the public was accustomed to seeing, they also remind us that strength is not the absence of struggle. Strength is continuing to be yourself through it. Dolly spent her entire life doing exactly that. So as fans look back on the final chapter of her journey, the most meaningful question may not be how difficult those health struggles became, but what Dolly chose to give the world before that chapter closed. The answer is almost impossible to measure. She gave people songs, she gave them laughter, she gave them stories, she gave them hope, she gave them a piece of herself. And long after the final performance, those gifts remain. Her health may have changed the way her final years unfolded, but it could never erase the life she had already built or the people she had already touched. That is why Dolly Parton's legacy will continue to feel so personal to so many. The final chapter may be filled with difficult emotions, but the full story is one of extraordinary resilience. And when the sadness eventually becomes quieter, what will remain is the same thing Dolly gave her audience for generations: a reason to keep listening, a reason to keep believing, and a reminder that even the most difficult parts of life can become part of a story worth remembering.